Tama ba? Angkop ba ang tugon ng pamahalaan at ng iba't ibang ahensya? Kasama po natin ngayon ang mga kaibigan natin mula po naman sa grupong may mahalagang papel sa kalusugan. Ito po yung PHAP. Kasama po natin ang Chief Executive Officer, si Ginoong Teodoro Padilla. Nasa aking kaliwa, narito rin po si Dr. Yamamoto, who is a fellow Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery Assistant Professor din sa Department of Surgery ng UST. Narito rin po si Dr. Cecilia Acuin. Siya po ay isang Doctor of Medicine at PhD. Siya po ay graduate faculty ng School of Nutrition sa Philippine Women's University at kasama po sa Universal Healthcare Study Group ng National Institute of Health ng Pamantasan ng Pilipinas. Narito rin po naman kasama natin si Ginoong Jopia. Siya po ang manager ng Community Health and Nursing ng Philippine Red Cross at si Dr. Edgar Posadas, Managing Director ng PHAPCares Foundation. I'd like to ask our friends sa ating panel kung ano ang kanilang pananaw sa naganap na bagyong Yolanda. Coming from the outside looking in, sina Dr. Yamamoto, si Dr. Acuin. Alam po ninyo itong mga taong panauhin natin, kung na-elect itong senador at presidente, vice-presidente, palagay ko, mas maraming magagawa. Kaya lang ang utak nila pag nauso na yung brain transplant, hindi na pakikinabangan, gastado kasi. Some in government, may utak na slightly used, kaya mahal yon. So let's start the ball rolling and let's talk about what's going on. Siguro sa PHAP, simulan natin. Ted, how does PHAP look at Yolanda? Ano ba ang inyong pananaw dito? Yes, please. Yung mikropono natin.
Thank you, Melo. Good morning. I wanted to break the ice, so to speak, with our statement which we prepared for this morning. After I give a few words, we will be showing you an AVP on what we've been doing with respect to Yolanda. So good morning again. No? The Pharmaceutical and Healthcare Association of the Philippines, or PHAP, represents 38 member companies. It is one with the country in its efforts to rebuild the Visayas and the other areas devastated by the Super Typhoon Yolanda, or Haiyan. At the center of these rebuilding efforts are the victims whose health have been compromised due to the disaster. In response, about 14.2 tons of medicines have been airlifted to eastern, western, and central Visayas to help address the emergency medical needs of the survivors. Apart from medicines, we also brought in anti-tetanus vaccines, even when it was at that time extremely challenging to transport vaccines due to massive power outages. At the moment, the PHAPCares Foundation, which is the CSR arm of the PHAP, has received 110 million worth of medicines and vaccines for the sole use of Yolanda victims. In the coming days, thousands of anti-tetanus vaccines and flu treatment will be dispatched to the disaster areas. The ongoing cleanup of debris, the presence of temporary shelters, and as we can feel it now, the ongoing cold season will continue to expose our countrymen to health hazards. As we enter the early recovery phase of our humanitarian efforts, PHAP is determined to look after the health of the people who are on the destructive trail of Yolanda. No rehabilitation will be complete without healthy individuals and communities. After more than 6,000 people recorded to have perished, there should be no more life, no more health of children. Women and elderly should again not be lost or compromised. Through our foundation, the PHAPCares Foundation, we will continue to be a private sector partner in restoring health and rebuilding health systems. We have also launched a campaign to serve as a reminder for the great health needs of the victims. We invite you to visit www.yolanda.phap.org.ph and to join us in our campaign to help Visayas, rise, recover, and hope. As mentioned, we have a brief audiovisual presentation to show to further introduce our works in disaster preparedness and response, among others. Maayong aga to all of us here and to the people in the Visayas. Thank you.
All right. Siguro labas muna natin yung video. Let's have it, Marian. Congratulations to PHAP. Okay. Mula kaya sa Red Cross, Ryan, ano na po na ng Red Cross sa mga lugar na tinamaan ni Yolanda? Anong karaniwang sakit yung napunan ninyo sa inyong pag-ikot sa mga lugar?
From the name of the typhoon itself, and the prefix, it's really super disaster. In terms of kung ano pong mga common diseases yung mga nakita namin, practically within this 2 months period, talagang mas din yung acute respiratory infections, yung kanyang ubo, sipon, lagnat. As well as some cases ng hypertension, na note din namin na tumaas din yung hypertension. This comes along as well with one of the top 5 yung diarrheal diseases, although hindi pa naman umabot sa outbreak threshold. And then some issues on measles. That's why along the way on the second and third week ng operation, the Red Cross also engaged with UNICEF and the World Health Organization for vaccination campaigns, along with assessment ng nutrition status ng mga bata sa area. And we're talking about Eastern Visayas, Samar provinces at saka yung Leyte, and as well as some areas in Palawan, Aklan, Iloilo, and Cebu. Particularly for the Red Cross, especially on the acute phase, mataas pa rin yung cases po ng injuries. That's why among the different program activities that was done by the Red Cross is also deploying different health teams, nurses and doctors, as well as an intention to support healthcare service delivery in the area, which came up with the deployment of different field hospitals in Eastern Samar, Iloilo, Cebu areas, which are until now operational. Just the same thing that we did in Zamboanga, which serve as really a primary healthcare hospital, and in one area supporting the Ormoc District Hospital was a field hospital capable of doing surgeries, even complicated surgeries. Medyo nakakatuwa din kasi we have noticed na tumaas din yung number ng mga nanay na nanganak during that period.
Ano kayo, sa nervyos?
No, we may not be able to really say kung ano, but that's something that we have really as well notably noticed, that we needed to erect another supplement tent just to accommodate mothers who are giving birth, cesarean section or normal delivery. And the Red Cross continues these activities, and these field hospitals still continue to function. The intention is to help until the health service delivery in the area has been fully established.
Okay. At this point in time, nandun pa kayo o binigay nyo na sa pamahalaan o sa NGOs ang pag-aalaga sa mga biktima?
At this point in time, we are still there, particularly doon po sa mga area ng Eastern Samar at saka Cebu, particularly yung Bantayan. We're still there, and we'll be assisting until the early recovery strategy implementation of the different local areas, local government areas.
Ano pinapakain nyo sa mga inaalagaan ninyong komunidad?
In terms of yung rations, yung mga unang periods is that we came up with the first initial first week ration, and then eventually along the way we had to modify kasi taking a look into the longer term nutritional states. We have to come up with the other packages supplementing with oils as well as the different mongo beans and aside from the regular components of the ration.
Okay. So, magtutungo tayo kay Dr. Ces. Sa pagsusuri po ba ninyo, ano ba dapat yung kinakain ng isang nasalanta? How different is it from those na karaniwan lang ang buhay? Dahil may stress yan.
Yeah.
Yes, doctor.
Well, lahat naman tayo may stress eh. So,
Meron yatang wala.
Pero yung average na tao, yung pangangailangan sa nutrition, pareho ang sa mga nasalanta during the immediate period. Ang problema, kailangan mo rin ihiwalay or ibigyan ng puna yung mga may mas malaking pangangailangan. Even under usual circumstances, they will really have greater needs. Yung mga buntis, yung mga lumalaking bata, yung mga may sakit, yung mga tatanda, at yung mga babies. Kasi yan yung mga tawag namin, mas mataas ang risk nila kasi mas mataas ang pangangailangan nila. So you cannot just give an ordinary, we were discussing this with Ryan earlier, you cannot just give an ordinary ration pack kasi that was the nutritional content of that was determined for the average person. And so people with higher requirements will need more. Yun. So, iyon yung hindi yata natin masyadong napapansin na kasi sa urgency no need.
Kahit ano na lang.
Ano is just get it there and then bahala na sila. Pero ngayon, nasa ano na tayo nasa supposedly recovery period. Yeah, we're around 2 months after. So the needs have also changed. So nabanggit kanina na may mga nanganganak na nanay. Hindi naman nawawala yan sa Pilipinas. May nagbubuntis, may nanganganak.
Opo.
So that has also to be given nutritional focus kasi ang breastfeeding nanay, ang lactating mother, in fact has greater nutritional requirements than the pregnant mother. So, kung yung pregnant, hindi na natin bigyan ng sapat na pansin nung bago or during nag-Yolanda, dapat ngayon, bigyan naman natin siya ng pansin na nag-lactate na siya. Kasi mas malaki yung pangangailangan niya at meron siyang baby na kailangan bigyan ng sustansya. So, I think that's one of the areas for focus. Then, of course, the children. We have aside from those who were born, we have children who are growing. They will not stop growing just because there was Yolanda. They will continue to grow and their requirements are still very high during the growing years. Yan yung I don't know whether we have differentiated the nutritional relief or the nutritional assistance in order to meet the requirements of these children.
Maganda yung binabanggit nyo.
So, yan yung... And then, earlier we were discussing na yung cultural appropriateness din ng mga binibigay na nutritional packages, no? Kasi, we have to realize na syempre pag madalian, kung ano yung madaling i-transport na makakatugon sa pangangailangan. So, what will meet the nutritional requiremements in the fastest way possible. And donors throughout the world have already packaged or predetermined what are the average nutritional requirements that will be needed, and then how do you package this in the most efficient way possible. And that's biscuits. That's the Biscuits of the World Food Program. Kasi madaling mag-transport ng biscuit.
Magaan.
At kaya nga, magaan. You don't need water to consume it, not like rice. You have to cook the rice. You need water to cook the rice and you need clean water. So, all of these requirements you don't need pag biscuits ang binigay. Unfortunately, sa pagbibigay, baka hindi masyadong naipaliwanag sa ating mga tumanggap kasi meron kami nakitang interview sa TV around that time na nagbibigay ng immediate relief na meron daw silang natanggap pero biscuit lang. Baka yun yung mga biscuit na yun. Those are high energy, high protein biscuits. They're not just any ordinary biscuits. They will meet the requirements but they're not culturally appropriate. So,
pero, yun nga po masustansya pero hindi naman
yun, hindi
sasapat sa tiyan.
Hindi nakakabusog sa Pilipino. So I think we need to explain kasi actually even if you don't feel full, you are already meeting your requirements. So there's a difference between the two. Kaya kailangan nating
So Doc, what you're saying is sa dinami-dami lang nagsasalita sa Malacanang, siguro dapat merong isa na ma-assign para magsabi na ito yan. Maraming communication experts din.
Yes.
Hindi po ba?
Well, I think na dapat sigurong merong taga-nutrition na kinakausap din at para may paliwanag yung mga bagay na yan.
Okay, very well. Dr. Joy Yamamoto, Paano po kung ang isang taga-Tacloban, isang taga-Giwan, may sakit sa puso, pagkatapos meron siyang maintenance ng mga gamot, nawala yung butika, nawala nga yung ospital, how will he survive?
Magandang question yan, Melo. But let me just try to answer the following. What we have seen do sa establishing footprints and boots on the ground, so to speak, do sa urgency of Yolanda, no? Many organizations, of course, expecting first and foremost the government and then appropriately enough, dumating yung mga foreign institutions. But before I can address the question ni Melo, what I'd like to say is the basic parameters that after the acute need of the people for water, then food, and then of course there is shelter, there's clothing, and then of course the medications. Our work, for example, in for Christ and its appropriate foundation for work with the poor, which is ANCO, answering the cry of the poor, saw to it that among the responses that our group, our community can do is to ensure that during disasters, we will make clean water available first and foremost. Because you can survive more than 24 hours without food, but not without water. And so we have actually appropriated lifesaver jerry cans, which are 5-gallon water filtration system that we can deploy very quickly. And even if these are unclean or contaminated waters, they can filter it down to the micron levels that can filter not only bacteria, viruses, and protozoa, and make the water safe and safe to drink. So that is the first and foremost. By the first, that is when the medical needs become a reality. And so judging from the magnitude, is that we allocate resources for pediatric patients, and then when able, that is when we will be able to make field our own medical teams and do the medical missions on site. And particular, for example, for Tacloban, about 7 to 10 days after the disaster, our group came down there, and we were really so in a way depressed by what we saw. We have been used to responding to many disasters in the past, but this is one time when the whole infrastructure of Tacloban was really reduced to near rubble. No hospital that we have seen was working, and so the delivery care of patients, both new and those under maintenance, including cardiac patients, would really suffer. And I guess this is where the challenge really is. If there is no available heart medications, we really have to try our best to partner with, for example, PHAP, and probably appropriate that in the future, even if this is not the whole segment of the healthcare delivery that you would like to desire, because there are many others, no? So this is only segment cardiac, but there is also asthma, there is infection that's going to go on, and in pediatric patients are the most vulnerable in terms of the addressing the health needs of the people.
Akala ko, Doc, sasabihin nyo, walang gamot, babalik tayo sa ICMO. Tatapalan natin. No? Pero seriously speaking, sa estimate po ba ng mga cardiologists tulad po ninyo, you're still with the academy and with the practice, sa bawat isang Pilipino ba, ilan ba yung may sakit sa puso? Baka merong mga Pilipino hindi nila alam may sakit na sila sa puso.
It's not surprising that maybe 20 years ago we were teaching our students in the Philippines, this is a third world country, therefore the most prevalent disease is probably the rheumatic valvular heart diseases, but not anymore. Even amongst those that are in the lower economic strata, we see cardiovascular diseases that are emerging. And what are these? This is really hypertension, and this is really also diabetes, because our diet, our food that is now geared, there is an SQ towards refined carbohydrate. That is, are the culprit in terms of inducing hypertension and also the metabolic syndrome or diabetes, which are actually coincident in the increasing incidence of acquired heart diseases. So, where before it is congenital, perhaps, as well as valvular heart diseases, today the most burgeoning heart problem in the Philippines is hypertension, coronary coronary artery disease, and diabetes.
Wow. So, babalik tayo sa dieta, pagkain. Alin mo mas mabuti? May kinakain o walang kinakain? Yan ang tanong
Of
ngayon.
course, if you have to have a choice, at least yung may kinakain ka.
Yung may kinakain.
And then you try to make your advocacy towards healthy food.
Very good. Very well.
Because like I would always tell people, between high energy food and no food at all, I would rather even low energy, high carbohydrate food, I'll give them.
Okay. Very well.
And that they are very hungry.
Dr. Acuin, your reaction please.
I was going to say, siyempre hunger yung bottom line mo dyan. So whatever will be available, you eat because you have to survive. But beyond survival, and we should be beyond survival now. We're already 2 months after Yolanda, no? So we should now be thinking about the quality of the foods that are available. And this is where I'm really worried because, and I hope Marian has my slides there, because my concern with what happened in Eastern Visayas is that we might not meet our Millennium Development Goal for reducing underweight prevalence. So kung titingnan nyo yung slide,
Sige nga po.
oo,
Please explain to us. Okay.
yan, okay. So part of the Millennium Development Goal 1, which is a reduction of poverty, is to reduce underweight prevalence in children from 0 to 5 years old. Ang goal dyan is to reduce it to 1/2 of what it used to be in 1990. Noong 1990, ang levels natin ay mga 27%. So by 2015, which is the target deadline for the MDG-1, dapat maging kalahati yan. So dapat maging 13.5, mga ganon. Kung makikita ninyo, as of 2011, nasa 20% pa lang tayo. We had a somewhat slow reduction up to about the late 1990s. Tapos tumaas, naging, hindi ko makita from here I think mga 26%. But anyway, and then for a whole decade, it stayed at 20%. Didn't move very much.
Hindi ko kaya nagkaroon ng dagbawas doon. Dahil parang hindi gumalo.
Sana pwedeng iboto lang to, no? Kasi iboto na lang natin na 13% siya, de madali yung problema, di ba? But my concern is we only have less than 2 years to bring it down. I don't think we will be able to bring it down from 20 to 13. On the other hand, I'm an optimist, as I said.
Yes.
In order to rehabilitate severe and moderately undernourished children, you only need 120 days of adequate and appropriate feeding. So theoretically kaya, even with what happened in Yolanda. But we need concerted efforts. Kasi hindi lang yan pwedeng health sector at hindi lang pwedeng nutrition sector. Kailangan sa whole societal effort. Kasi sabi ko nga kanina kay Ma'am Tess, if you have a pregnant mother who's going to deliver, the DOH will put up the health facility and maybe the private sector will provide the obstetrician. But how will you get the mother to the facility? You need transportation. If that mother is going to need blood, then you need communication so you can find the nearest source of the blood.
Which is the Red Cross.
Which is the Red Cross. But where in the community of the mother might the Red Cross be most efficiently connected so that we can get the blood in the most expedient way? It's just it's a little out of nutrition, but it's an example of how it cannot be just health. You cannot just rely on the health sector to meet health goals.
Yes.
You need to go beyond. So yun yung isa. Lalo na sa nutrition, kasi ang gumagawa ng pagkain ay hindi naman nutritionist. I mean, the source of the food comes from the farmer and the fisherman. And then that food needs to be transported to where people can access them. And then the access issues are not just yung physical access dun sa pagkain, yung cost ng pagkain. Sa Yolanda areas, yan yung malaking problema nila ngayon. Kahit may pera sila, ang taas ng halaga ng bilihin. Ang itlog daw doon, dito sa Metro Manila, mga 5-6 pesos, doon doble, 12, 15, o triple pa. Ang isang itlog. So, di ba nabasa ko yan sa dyaryo, I think yesterday or the other day, tinatanong, should we give money to the people, to the victims of Yolanda, knowing that that's the situation? I mean, how much money can you give kung gano'n ang tumpa? Or how much
Hindi mo
money
naman
will they need?
maluluto yung 10 piso.
Oo, kaya nga. So, baka hindi sa ngayon, yung immediate response, yung food needs nila, baka talagang kailangan, pa rin, supplemental feeding stage
Doc,
pa rin tayo.
Sa paanan ng Mayon, pag umuulan, laging may evacuation. At ako'y naging saksi sa mga ganong pangyayari, having stayed in Albay for 15 years. Pero ang sigaw ng mga bata, pag ini-evacuate sila, tuwan-tuwa, Nay, sardinas na naman. So, anong impact nito kung araw-araw halos, sardinas na lang ang kakanin nyo?
Yes. Well, actually, hindi naman yan eh. Kasi ang sardinas ay, kung fresh sardines yan, nutritious naman yan.
Fresh sardines.
Fresh sardines. Ang problema yung processed sardines kasi hindi mo alam kung ano na yung mga hinalo doon eh. For those who have hypertension, mataas ang sodium load ng processed foods, including sardines. So, pero kung sa bata, hindi masyadong issue yung hypertension pa. Ang nagiging concern natin, nagsasawa tayo dun sa pagkain.
Opo.
So, yun yung hindi meet yung nutritional requirements. Also, baka hindi na sapat kung sardines lang. Kaya sabi nga ni Ryan kanina, they include oils, so they include legumes. Legumes are mga munggo, ganyan, mga pagkain coming from beans. Kasi may proteins din naman yon na not necessarily sardinas. Mahirap kasi yung mag-isip ng protein source na madaling i-transport at pwede mong i-store. Because you cannot do that for meat, for example. It's very hard to
Does it
store
make any difference kung yung sardinas lunod yung isda sa sarsa?
kasi yung iba inuulam yung sarsa lang, walang masyadong
Yun na nga ang
sustansya ang
problema
sarsa.
natin doon. Okay. Pero katulad yan, sa PHAP, how do you look at this? Merong anecdotes na may mga namatay na pasyente sa palo dahil sa gustong bumili ng gamot, walang mabiling gamot dahil wala namang butika. How does PHAP look at this and how does PHAPCares view this? Simulan natin siguro.
Thank you, Melo. Actually, something you mentioned in ability to get health, no? Because although we have the medicines, the problem is always the delivery, no? And I think I want to also turn over this topic to Dr. Ed Posadas of PHAPCares because he has a very good first-hand account of the delivery mechanisms for medicines and other health matters in the affected areas. No?
Yes, Dr. Posadas, please.
Thank you, sir. It's nice to be sitting beside my former professor. I was listening to Dr. Yamamoto earlier. Pero the 30 years ago,
establish mo lang naman yung edad mo. Ikaw na. Huwag na, don't rub it in.
Melo, just would like to, ang problema kasi is, with Yolanda, this is something different. We always say we have to prepare for contingencies, but Yolanda was different. Lahat ng mekanismo defied all odds. The magnitude and actually, sanay tayo sa disaster, especially Eastern Visayas. Yun ang naging problema kasi they are used to strong typhoons. And on that day, it was still, the sun was still up. And they were sort of, they underplayed the possibility na mag-evolve siya into something ganun ka. But nonetheless, ang problema kasi is how to find you have to be strategic, especially dun sa acute response. So ang ginawa namin, we found institutions, in this case, Eastern Visayas Regional Medical Center, na we're very thankful. Nakita kami ni Ryan doon and DOH was there. Maganda yung interoperability ng private sector. They put in a system which is very conducive for private sectors to come in. So, ang ginawa namin initially, we dropped our initial donation to EVRMC, which caters to the whole Eastern Visayas region, not only for Eastern Leyte, but also for the province of Samar. Very strategic because it's a tertiary hospital and volunteers like Dr. Yamamoto from the private sector were also there, yung mga consultants were there. Kasi that was a relatively functioning hospital, although nung initial stages, merong mga nakuha din na patay inside the EVR-MC compounds. We were there during that time. And I think we have to give credit to the system also that they put in. Kasi kung maglalagay ka ng sistema, that would be easy for us in the private sector to come in. And to find a proper conduit so that it would be distributed accordingly to those who need it actually.
So, paano yung transport kung nagkaroon nga ng ganong kalawak na pinsala? How did you do it?
We have to be innovative. We have to imagine. So, in our case, sa foundation, nagtatatlo lang kami. Of course, si Sir Ted, we have an account person. But the foundation, we are only 3. Ako, si Emer, and one more sa admin. So you have to really find we partner with OCD and the RRMC. We went via Cebu kasi yun yung logistics during that time. We brought in 2.4 tons initially na ayaw pa una isakay kasi masyado daw mabigat. So what we did, we waited for 3 days sa Benito Ebuen Air Base and then nilipad yun sa Tacloban. And from there, we also have our friends on the ground who helped us out transported to EVRSC from the airport. It took us a long time. In fact, malapit lang dahil maraming clearing during that time. Even in Tacloban itself, it's difficult to really bring the goods to where it should
Did
go.
you get the help from the local government or from the national government, like the police and the armed forces?
Well, the armed forces was there, DOH was there, but not so much because that was barely 2 weeks, Melo.
But that's 2 weeks is too long, in fact. Dapat meron ng system eh.
Yeah, we have a system, pero more on we dealt with DOH system kasi.
Okay.
With the DOH system, we went via the regional hospital nga. So, kami naman, hindi kami nahirapan when we got there already. They have a system, may mag-receive, may magdo-document, kung gusto mo ng konting photo. So, they have a very nice system. Actually, very fast. Ang problema namin noon, Melo, we brought in vaccines kasi. So, medyo matagal kasi
Wala kang refrigerator.
Yes. Ni-re-ice namin sa Cebu. Doktor, EVRMC has a ref during that time. So yung kanilang warehouse, yes. So from delivery, diniretso na agad yun, Sir Melo. Kasi yung re-icing noon is good for 24 hours lang. So we had it re-iced in Cebu sa isang partner namin na company doon. And then in time for the transport to Tacloban.
Okay, mabuti nililiwanag niyo. Pero let me ask the doctors around at ganun si Ted. Anong protocol ang na-observe natin if a foreign government, let's say the United States, China, Japan, Korea, even the Germans came in with their medicines. Ano yung protocol nating ino-observe kung tanggap ba o angkop ba sa Pilipino yung gamot na dala nila? Who regulates all this? Who says pwedeng ibigay ito? Dr. Yamamoto, Dr. Acuin, paano pa?
I will respond sa question ni Melo on several levels. The first level is the transportation of goods, resources, and donated medicines. Having established presence on the ground for a few days doon sa Ormoc and Tacloban, I realized that there were certain things that hopefully wala naman tayong mga ganong magnitude of disasters. No? But there would probably be improvements in the way on the logistical side is needed. I realized that listening to the people on the ground, and I think it's a key word is listening, is that while Cebu became a major hub of support as well as in the replenishment of needed food and medicines and other stuff, what I realized was that there were areas that were underutilized. For example, we discovered this later that you could have used Surigao del Norte as a hub for transporting by ship, not only to Ormoc and Tacloban, but there is a good seaport in Sogod. Mm-hmm. Sogod in southern Leyte is a deep seaport. It was used, in the Second World War, in transporting. The people in Sogod said, they could have used Sogod as a transport hub and go all the way up to Ormoc and Tacloban.
So it was so bad, not so good.
It's so good. It's actually advancing. Really, a way to advance rather than anything. That is one. The other thing that we also saw that in the response, the overwhelming response of the international community is that, one, it really makes you really, in a way, happy because they responded. But at the same time, you feel that we could do better in the future because they fielded hospitals, field hospitals, tents, and it's very impressive. I was able to visit one in Ormoc and one other in Tacloban, and I was really impressed. More than the medicines that they brought in, because these are all calibrated for acute disaster response. So they would have brought in appropriate medicines. So I have no doubt about that. But what was really impressive is the portable hospital delivery care systems that they did, hospital tents. And this is probably something that in the near future, our government, whether they do it alone or in partnership with the international community, should be able to field several of those. They can do operations on the field. You know, they have running water, they have air conditioning, they have beds and monitors for the patients. They have handled trauma cases in Ormoc. They have handled deliveries and acute abdomen, and they were appropriately responded to. And again, talking to the people, the one in particular that we were able to interact with is the group from Canada and Norway. And we were really impressed because in 3 days after Yolanda struck the Philippines, they were already moving. They were all volunteers. They were just they just received by SMS and telephone calls from many areas in Norway and Canada, and in less than a week they were already there. So this is really there's plenty of room for improvement, and much to say that we cannot probably discount the kind of international support that we did. For example, as you land in Tacloban, among the things that impressed me most was really the organization that the U.S. Armed Forces did. As your plane lands, you see the portable radar that they have. Our terminal was damaged, and they have the portable radar. They have the people that are sorting out and transporting goods that have piled up in the airport. So my take there is that we really need to even strengthen our partnership with the international community. And I think this is not going to be lost to the Filipinos, to the government. And at the same time, to be fair with the people there in Ormoc and Tacloban, the policemen and the other government officials, or even the personnel, are victims themselves. So
Yes.
I cannot really fault them for not being there, because I would probably have to even honor them because they did what they can, considering that they have also lost family members.
Yeah.
And hospitals were really down. And then churches were all down. All the institutions were down. Generally, when I went to Compostela Valley and the other part is in Digos, the last time there was a disaster there, I would imagine that, on the one town that we went there, I would say 95% of the houses were down. But in Ormoc, in Tacloban in particular, I would say 98% were really down.
Yeah. You have no problems with the medicines brought in by foreign governments?
I have no problems with them because these groups have been in tune with the kind of the disaster that they meet in many areas around the world. So they would have responded appropriately.
Wala ho nagdala ng gaw-gaw. Wala kayo na po na. Kayo po, sa PHAP, how do you look at yung protocols?
Yes. Well, for sure, what was followed was because the companies, our member companies, are attuned, as Dr. Yamamoto mentioned, to the international guidelines or disaster prepared response, so that the medicines that our member companies donated have, of course, to follow the guidelines of the WHO and the Red Cross as well. And in fact, there was one member company that was donating vaccines that was coming from a plant in Eastern Europe. So the concern was, of course, in terms of the labeling. So we had to ensure that those labels were printed in English in terms of its use, and they complied. Of course, they knew that. So we were very pleased with the magnitude of the response, and as well as the ability to adapt, to be flexible to the requirements on the ground.
Maganda, pinapaliwanag ninyo. Pero in the first place, yun ho bang pagkain, Dr. Acuin, ano ba yung lifespan nito? yung shelf life. Let's say, nag-impake kunwari dito sa NROC, sa Villamulo Air Base. Ilang araw dapat pagka-impake nito makarating dun sa pagdadalhan?
Depende sa pagkain at saka kung halimbawa raw siya o processed siya or niluto. So the way that the food was handled and processed will guide you as to the shelf life of that particular food.
Yeah.
Pero yung sinasabi kong biscuits ng
World Food Program.
buwan yun ang ang kanilang lifespan doon, ang shelf life noon kasi they're really meant to withstand prolonged storage.
Yeah.
Ang mga alam naman natin yan kahit sa bahay, no? Ang mga very short talaga ang lifespan or storage life is yung mga bagong lutong pagkain. At saka yung mga hilaw na pagkain na kailangang lutuin. Yan talaga, a few hours and they're spoiled. I mean, pansit. You cook it now, maybe in 2 hours, it may not be edible anymore.
Yeah.
So you don't donate pansit, not cooked pansit anyway. If you want to donate pansit, you send it as raw. And then, kaya lang, poproblemahin nila kung paano lulutuin yon pagdating doon sa, donor site. Kaya yung instant noodles Kasi ang instant noodles, pag hindi mo pa tinitimpla, matagal din ang storage life niyan or ang shelf life niyan. Ang problema sa instant noodles is, again, the sodium content. Kasi mataas ang sodium content nun. So, yung mga may hypertension,
Delikado na naman.
hindi nila dapat lagay yung flavor packet. Huwag na nilang ihalo yon kasi nandun lahat ng sodium. Kung gusto nilang lagyan ng panglasa, timplahan na lang nila ng sarili nila para kontrolado nila yung amount of sodium na pumapasok dun sa kanilang noodles.
Okay.
Oo.
Kaya ko na itanong yan dahilan sa narinig kong reklamo nung ilang nag-iimpake, nagkakarga ng sako-sako dito sa may pier at kahit doon sa may airport. Kaya raw hindi makapagbuhat yung mga sundalo dahil hamburger sa umaga, pagdating naman ng tanghali, chicken joy, hanggang gabi, chicken joy. Kung nagbubuhat ka, hindi mo kailangan yung chicken joy. Ang kailangan mo ron, may gulay ka, meron kang kahit kaluluwa ng karne. Pero ang tanong ko ngayon, Doktor, ganito, alin ba mas mabuti? Yung pagkain ibibigay mo, mag-community kitchen ka sa isang disaster area?
Well, I will defer to Ryan for how they do it in Red Cross for now.
Yeah, okay. Ryan.
For us po in terms of food and nutrition, for the first 72 hours, we opt to do soft kitchen, hot meals, especially within the first 72 hours. Our presumption is that people don't have utensils or anything to use for them to cook.
Yes.
And then another measure is to come up with ready-to-eat meals, yung can na mayroon na siyang rice and food bayan. Kasi although at some point we would like to consider na dilata agad na, like for example at the regular rations, baka naman wala din silang canned openers. So we have those options of giving soup, hot meals and then ready-to-eat meal and then going with regular rations, especially when you know na kaya na nila magluto in the area.
Okay, pero you have a nutritionist also to look into yung dapat na sustansyang makakain ng mga biktima.
Yes. Actually, in terms of the humanitarian actions where the Red Cross is involved in internationally and locally, we follow this what we call sphere standards. And this is sphere standards. This dictates what needs to be the composition ng kung ano man pong ibibigay. Doon po namin binabase yung anong dapat ibigay for the first week, sa second month, first month, gano'n and so forth and so on. We also have this technical person to check on, are we really providing this appropriate food to the affected communities? And aside from that, aside from the regular rations and the regular food security activities na ginagawa namin, we also engage in supplementary feeding activities, particularly giving attention to children under 5 years old.
Okay.
This is in addition to the regular rations that we give.
Okay, pero anong konsiderasyon ng binibigay ng Red Cross at dapat ibigay sa mga dual citizens na, yung senior citizens? Dahil iba rin ang pagkain nun, hindi po ba? Sa inyo po sa Red Cross, do you have special food for the elderly?
For us, actually, it's not really special food, but and a different strategy. Because, for example, in terms of people needing special attention on nutrition, we have this option on, let's say, alternative on cash alternatives. Like say, when the market is available, mayroon sila mabibilhan ng mga pagkain. So, what we do is that we as a movement, as a Red Cross movement, can shift into cash initiatives. Maybe give them cash and then vouchers, and then it's up to them to select what's for them is culturally acceptable and acceptable in terms of what their status is. So they can have alternatives on what food to take.
So may sensitivity Red Cross doon.
Yes, and it's also has something to do with, like for example, yung ready-to-eat meal na binibigay namin, or the soup kitchen na hot meals na binibigay, has also something to do with consideration of with what is halal, what is acceptable to these people. Kasi it's not only about nutrition, it's not only about yung preference ng bata matanda. It has well something to do with culture and their religious affiliations.
Yes, of course.
In
Very
respect
well.
to that.
Oh, can you imagine, magdi-distribute ka ng dinuguan sa may mga kapatid, di nagkagulo yan. Paano nga naman yun? Pero seriously speaking, Dr. Ses, yung pagkain ng senior citizens, ano dapat yun? What should it be? Because, pag nasa evacuation center yan, sama-sama na po sila.
Totoo yan. Mas mahirap magkaroon ng specific kinds of foods for the elderly. Unfortunately, in an evacuation or a disaster situation, dahil sama-sama nga sila, mahirap na sabihin na, ito kasi mataas ang kanyang blood pressure, kailangan mababa yung sodium. Ito dahil diabetic siya, kailangan mababa yung sugar. Yung mga ganon. O kaya kailangan mataas ang fiber content, kailangan maraming kailangan. Pero in a situation like that, it's hard to meet those specific requirements. So what they do is they just give whatever is available. Now, ang elderly, madalas ang mga issues nila, hirap silang ngumuya. Kasi may mga dentition or may mga swallowing problems, ganyan. So siguro ang pwedeng gawin is to give them the softer foods that are available. So for example, bread and noodles might be easier for them to chew compared to rice, halimbawa, or And then kung meron kang mga protein sources, hirap din sila, let's say, sa mga meats. Kasi mahirap nguyain ng meat. Kailangan Kailangan i-chop mo.
Grilled dyan.
Oo, so
Pwede
dapat ground.
Ground.
Oo, dapat ground o kaya finely chopped, mga ganon. And then because marami silang mga medical issues, maraming bawal. Actually, isa yan sa mga plea ko sa mga internist colleagues ko eh. Wag naman ibabawal lahat. Kasi may mga ganon na, bawal ho sa inyo to, bawal ho sa inyo to, bawal ho sa inyo to. Pagdating ng pasyente sa akin, doktora, wala na akong kinakain kasi sabi nung doktor ko, lahat daw yan bawal sa akin. Anong pwede kong kainin? So, yun yung, from the nutrition perspective, yun yung dumarating sa akin. So, I think that we need to be a little more circumspect about how we give nutritional counseling to the elderly. But in an emergency situation, there's really very little you can do.
Yeah. Pero Dr. Yamamoto, tell us, anong impact ng disaster sa mga tao na pag may stress, baka lalo madali ang buhay? How should they cope with all the problems brought about by disasters in the first place?
Okay, so it's a very fascinating question kasi some of the things that we did as responders is that, focus on the medical side. But of late, we realized that we brought in our own psychosocial group where there's stressors that need to be addressed and understood. For example, when there were not only eruptions but also there were mudslides that came from Albay, I think you remember that a few years back, and other calamities like Sendong and Ondoy in Manila, Ondoy and Sendong in Mindanao. And then at the same time, this now, we brought in psychologists to help them understand and confront the stress factors. Because, for example, the young children are most vulnerable because in the aftermath of the disaster, have that imprints of those psychological trauma. Even if it just starts to drizzle and rain, the children starts having panic attacks. So we brought in our own clinical psychologists to help them cope up with those by explaining and giving them advices on how to do it. It is still in the early phase of our own response, not only taking care of the physical needs, but also the psychosocial needs of the people. Okay. And of course, just to emphasize that at the end of our question and answering that question is that indeed psychosocial and psycho-emotional factors do have their own impact in how people respond to stress. As a matter of fact, they can probably trigger either strokes or hypertensive crisis.
Oh, could this be the reason why the Americans had Bob Hope during the earlier years to entertain troops assigned elsewhere in the world?
Well, it's really one of those, to entertain people, and perhaps on a small scale that work for the American troops. Now, I don't know if it's going to work for the Filipinos in the disaster areas, but it's worth trying. I don't just discount it and say that it's irrelevant, but simply say it's worth trying. Simply that people being helped how to cope up with the emotional stresses and the other physical stresses are really indeed being helped by being to address one way or the other stressor factors.
Yeah, some people would say sending Volksgasmin and Maroas to the area didn't help, no? But you need not react to that. We're not talking of comedians anyway. Yes, please, Doc.
Maganda yung aspect na tinanong mo na yun, Melo. Kasi napansin din, ako personally, I went to the 4 regions. PHAPCares went to the 4 regions na talagang affected by Yolanda. I think yung Filipinos have an innate of coping. We are very resilient people, very jolly, very positive. Yung alam mo na gutom sila, i-share pa nila sa'yo gusto mo, yung biscuit na isusubo na lang nila, i-share pa nila sa'yo with a smile. I think they've built in, that's one positive thing about Filipinos. We're innately resilient, and then yung faith natin in God, pinapasa Diyos natin lahat. Although yung gusto ko lang din dagdagan yung ni Dr. Yamamoto, PHAPCares also supported one program nung mag-Christmas, yung Toys for the Victims of Yolanda, because sabi nga ni Doctor, yung those under 5, lalo na 0 to 5, are very vulnerable emotionally. So malaking bagay sa kanila, yung we partnered with DOH and the National Center for Mental Health. We supported them by giving toys to these victims. Malaking bagay, stuffed toys, something that they could cuddle, something that they could, somehow talk to if they need to, parang role play, And then we ourselves, we saw that importance, so we are also training as a team ng at least we started with psychological first aid, PFA. It's very important kasi even responders could fall prey to the fatigue, to the stress. Mahirap po yung nakikita mo, akala mo ready ka, I'm a doctor, pero pag nakita mo yung reality on the ground, apektado ka eh. And so you have to do PFA sa sarili mo, yung psychological first aid, kasi wala namang tutulong sa'yo.
Yeah.
Another thing is yung program ng DSWD, yung play therapy. Minsan pati kami nakikipaglaro, just a ball, nagpapasa-pasa lang sila ng ganon. That relieves the stress. If you saw one of the pictures, we were with kids na sa likod po may sunog yung sa Zamboanga, nagbobombahan. But the kids are playing to divert their attention from because they have a more difficult time coping po than the adults.
Yeah, I saw the Philippine Red Cross dun sa sports complex sa Zamboanga. Meron silang area for children to play. And that's something. If you don't talk to someone, if you don't interact with someone, si Tom Hanks dun sa kanya, kausap niya si Wilson, yung bola ng volleyball. No? Ano ba pelikula yun? Castaway. Okay. We will open the floor to friends from the media. Let's start with this lady from the right hand portion of our hall. Yes.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Tess Ramiro from CMN, at the same time with an NGO. You're all coming from the private sector. I was wondering, what's your take on how our government has been responding to the Yolanda victims from day one up to the present? That's my first question. As a private sector group or individual. Second, I am all for psychosocial, spiritual even, not only therapy but support for people, especially the victims. But have you also considered the health aspect when it comes to sanitation? Meaning to say, how do they take a bath? Where do they pee? How do they poo? You know, all these things, basic from the children all the way to adults. Because may ibang private sector na gumawa lang yung pagpapaligo, like an TV network did that. But that's not enough for the thousands of people who have to go through life without drinking water, much more with bathing water. So, those are my questions.
Okay. I remember listening to a radio station this morning, sabi ng isang municipal disaster mitigation official. Kaya po kami, nag-order po si Mayor, nagkaroon po kami ng preemptive evac. Nagulat ako. Paano yun? Anyway, yung tanong ni Tess Ramiro. Paano po? How would you respond to that? Yung health and sanitation? Yes, Doc.
Doctora, can I answer the second question? I leave the first question to the... nung nagpunta po kami, I'll cite one area. We went to Northern Iloilo in Estancia. For those of you, I'm sure you're covering the double whammy sila eh. They had the double disaster in that they had Yolanda. And ito pong si Yolanda, meron siyang talagang when she hit, alam niya yung malalayo na mahirap puntahan. Usually the northern side. We also went to Calamianes when we had to fly by a six-seater, one-engine plane to get there. No? So yung sagot ko po sa inyo, unfortunately, nakita ko po, at least yung nakita ko na evacuation center for the oil spill. Nagkaroon sila ng oil spill dahil yung barge po medyo tumagas. Ano? It was the Canadian Armed Forces who provided them with the latrines and a watering hole, yung source of water that they really dug into the soil, the ground, and then it provided for clean, potable water. There was one technology that they used. Pero I agree with you, Doctora. I think yun yung medyo, kasi ang dami po talaga eh. Hindi ko rin pwede naman pong sabihin dito. Ito po base sa experience ko. Siyempre meron tayong mga ideals, Doktora, di ba? Mine-mention ni Ryan kanina yung sphere standard ng UN and WHO. Pero pagdating po kasi sa ganong kalaking disaster, Doktora, medyo hindi, ako man po nilalagay ko yung sitwasyon ko doon sa kanila, baka I could have done worse, no? Mas madali siguro. But I think I have to give also government that credit and all those responders, no? Na I think they did their, they did what they could. Unfortunately talaga, it was a great disaster that we weren't expecting. It's a lesson learned for us na actually Yolanda is another yung response natin, it made us rethink the way we respond to disasters. These are not the usual day-to-day responses that we do. PHAPCares is used to this, but ito pong magnitude ng Yolanda, Doktora, was really something unimaginable. And we went to the ground, kami rin mismo parang tulala ka eh. Did this really happen? So siguro moving forward, dapat mabilis tayong we gather all the facts, yung mga lessons learned, and we revisit our policies. Nandyan po yung batas, yung RA 10121, kompleto siya, it's very comprehensive. It's being administered by the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council, of which we partner with. Pero siguro dapat ma-revisit natin yung implementation. Nandito si Doktora, pati doon sa batas po, dapat bawal na yung milk feeding. Dapat talagang breastfeeding talaga, even in evacuation centers. And we espouse for that also. So, yun po yung experience namin.
And you refuse to answer the first question. Okay. We understand. Yes, from the Red Cross, please.
In terms of, maybe it's not only about how the government responded, but as well as the question would be, how are we continuing to respond in the current needs of the population? one aspect in terms of the question of sanitation, the Red Cross has particularly given priority for these aspects, not only to food and medical attention, but as well as ensuring safe water and sanitation services. As you have seen from the start, the Red Cross has been able to mobilize from all sorts of form, taking a look into having risk deciding on transporting by land for us to be able to reach on time in the ground, as well as participating into some things that are not conventionally known for the Red Cross to do, like collection of dead bodies, and alongside with the intention as well as speeding up clearing operations, we did not only take a look into building latrines, but as well as mobilizing payloaders just to be able to help in the recovery process, as well as being able to facilitate the identification of areas where tents can be pitched. The Red Cross has begun its work in the building of latrines, but in the first phases of the response, we were able to really mobilize tanks, water tanks, for example, and establish water points for us to be able to provide safe water, which then at some point in time were used even by the people to maintain their hygiene.
Yeah, I've seen those facilities in Iligan about more than a year ago.
Yes,
Red
we continue to do such, including the ones in Bohol and Zamboanga, which we are taking active role in terms of water and sanitation and even hygiene, just to make sure that we contribute in the disease prevention and control.
Okay. Doctora? Yes, doctor.
Well,
Would you care to answer the first question?
Sinagot na ni Ed eh. Pero,
Okay.
Tsaka marami nang nag-evaluate ng past. So I think I'd rather look to the future and pick up what we can learn from this experience.
Yeah.
I think for me, as a researcher, ang isa sa mga pinaka mahalaga sana nating natutunan ay we need the information beforehand. We
Okay.
don't need the information retrospect. So one of the things that we can do for future planning is if you know the storm is going to hit in the center, you prepare the ones just north of them and just south of them. Yung mga most likely hindi naman ganun mapipinsala para sila yung magdadala ng tulong dun sa na-affect na area. Kasi ang nangyari sa Tacloban, dun din nila nilagay yung relief goods. Dun din sila naghanda. Kasi hindi naisip na masasalanta din yung areas kung saan nila inimbak o warehouse yung kanilang mga relief
So, Doc,
goods.
sa statement po ninyo, parang lumalabas na hindi ka panipaniwala yung advisory ng Pag-asa?
Hindi naman. Ewan ko kung anong ginawa nilang advisory at hindi ko alam kung sinunod nila. That's another
Meron po
complicated area. But
Opo.
I think, yun na nga, if you anticipate na yun yung tatamaan, oo, sige, okay, maglagay ka na rin ng konting relief goods doon. Pero hindi dapat lahat nandoon. Kasi nga, pagka yun ang binaha, o yun ang tinamaan ng bagyo, wala ka ng first response. Ang first response mo nasa labas dapat ng affected area. I think, this is my opinion, I'm not a disaster expert. But just knowing, like, tayo, pagka alam natin na babahain yung lugar na yun, hindi mo naman ilalagay yung kotse mo doon. Kasi babahain yun. Exactly. So, saan mo dadalhin yung kotse mo? Kung saan safe. So, ganun din yun. Yung ihahanda mo, doon mo immobilize sa lugar na hindi ma-affect ng disaster.
Yung pong statement na kaya hindi kami nagpadala ng sundalo dahil baka magutom din yung mga sundalo namin. How do you look at it?
Hindi sila nagpadala ng sundalo
Dahil baka raw magutom.
magugutom.
Baka magutom.
Naku naman. Di ba kaya nga yung army ay binibigyan ng sangkatutak na resources para din?
Yun nga alam ko, yung sundalo meron Charlie ration. Yun ang problema. Pero pagtatanong natin, test ano
Iba
yan?
yung peace and order.
The reason why I raised that question about you as private sector groups in relation to government is precisely to find out how the private sectors and government work together in a situation such as this. Because coming from the outside and just listening to you, you're from different groups, but I don't see also how you as private groups work together. Because kung nagkakagulo ang ating gobyerno, I'm sure, yung mga, paano ba, sino ba ang may hawak talaga na cooperation such as, hindi ako maguguluhan. Kung ako yung recipient ng tulong, tutulong si ganito, tutulong si B, tutulong si C, tutulong si D, basta lahat kayo tumulong, amin na. Pero, ano yung resulta dun sa taong tinutulungan? That's the reason why I raised the question about how you look at government, because if you're a private sector and you want to cooperate with government, asan yung meeting point? Such that we can tell government, next time, pwede nyo kaming maasahan sa ganitong area, sa ganitong usapin. On the other hand, as private sectors din, nakikinig ako sa inyo, pwede ko palang hinga ng tulong ang PHAPCares pagdating sa ganito, o ang Red Cross pagdating sa ganito. Kasi ako yung biktima eh.
Okay. Yes, please.
Doctora, thank you. No? Yes. PHAP, as mentioned, in 2003, when we set up the PHAPCares Foundation, the initial mandate was really to it gave a commitment to donate. There was a figure given of 100 million worth of medicines annually through the DOH. And eventually, it became a widespread government mandate. So we continue to work closely with the Department of Health, with the Office of Civil Defense, and the RRMC, and the Armed Forces of the Philippines. So it helps, of course, that Dr. Posadas and his colleague, Emmer, are also reserve officers and NCOs in the armed forces. No? So they have the network of individuals that they can call on for assistance. It's really, if you're going to talk about coordinated response, it's also a way of just, sometimes it's who you know on the field that can get you there quickest. No? And kudos to these two gentlemen, because they were really very resourceful, no, in how to get to those disaster areas. No? But when we did a debriefing of these two who have seen a lot, it's mind-boggling. You know? This whole Yolanda experience has never been seen before.
Yeah.
So you can just imagine as well how our government authorities have responded, or how they reacted to this. No? It's hard to judge, no? Because again, this is unprecedented. But I think, as Dr. says, let's look at it going forward. No? What can we do to prevent such a thing, or to at least mitigate such a disaster in the future? No? And then one point raised was about disaster preparedness. No? Because even in the private sector, when you talk about storage of, let's say, critical data, you do not put your data recovery centers in the same city as your headquarters. No? You put them outside. So in the event that your building gets hit by a surge or what, you can recover your operations, or your people, like during the time of the attempted coups back in the 80s and 90s, people were working off-site, no? Because you had to continue your operations. No? So maybe that's one lesson that we can also adapt here. No?
Very well. Dr. Yamamoto, please.
I'd like to address the question ni Doctora. No? This may not be giving you the correct, complete answer, but I think I'll try. I think in all the circumstances, in any disaster, that is really the primordial responsibility of the government to be the baton wielder. Therefore, it stands to reason that there should be a really more systematized private-public partnership in this regard. And I don't think the private organizations, foundations are hesitant or even reticent to cooperate. I think it's just a matter of the government giving us really the right and clear leadership.
Okay.
But to be fair about the whole situation, and I saw this with my own eyes, in terms of the preparation, I believe that the pronouncements that they have prepositioned rice in the province is correct. Because I saw the warehouse, which is really made of concrete, that was filled with rice, that's supposed to be to address whatever would be the outcome of the storm. Judging that the storm was unprecedented in its magnitude and its strength, the rice there were inundated. So
there was rice.
There was rice there. It was really precisely because, from what I have been told, it was really to be part of the response when the storm hits the ground.
It makes a lot of difference do sa balita nung panahon ni Tita Cory na may lumubog na barko na may bigas na hindi naman nakita yung bigas.
But this one really, that was really rice, and they were really
Okay,
spoiled.
very
And
good.
that is really, I think, it is really to be fair with what is happening. And you don't get this mainly from media pronouncement, but you really have to go around and establish your boots on the ground. And I guess this is probably a good starting point on future responses.
Okay. Yes, Doc?
I agree with Dr. Yamamoto. In fact, sinabi rin yan ng partners natin on the ground that before the typhoon struck, you have to realize that Yolanda goes down to history as the strongest typhoon ever to hit land, 315 kilometers per hour, a Category 5 typhoon, stronger than Katrina. Naka-preposition, however, the magnitude and the waves, when the surge came in, the 3 successive waves that wiped out literally, let's say San Jose, Barangay San Jose. If you're familiar with Tacloban, that's the vicinity around the airport. There was nothing there. Nobody was moving except for the 7 people who were on the roof of the Tacloban airport during that time. And Dr. Ray, siguro, I came also from government, from the NDRMC, isang pwede nating makitang aspect na pwedeng i-strengthen. I'm sure si Ryan knows about this, yung cluster approach. You were talking about hygiene kanina that involved, Ryan spoke about DVI, yung disaster, yung identification of the dead. In fact, sinasabi doon na hindi ka dapat mag-mass grave mag-mass grave if you had a way. Because you have to identify, there's a process, you have to identify, but because hindi na natin kaya technically, so we agreed to bury them in mass graves. But in reality, dapat kung pwede sana, kailangan ma-identify sila as much as possible. Secondly, yung psychosocial also is an aspect that dapat i-strengthen din yun. And in fairness to government, they came up with, we were invited to being one of the stakeholders in the Zamboanga siege, we were invited to that donors forum. It was like a healthy discussion. There was a presentation, and then there was, the private partners inputted, and all the government agencies. There was a healthy exchange of views of what went well, what went wrong, and we identified the gaps. I hope lang that Dr. Aden said kanina, if we could do this for every disaster, there's the private sector and there's government, and of course there's media. Kasi importante, we believe, we at PHAPCares, it's not because you're here, but because we really believe in the importance of the media as a partner, sometimes as an umpire. So, very, very important yon, because the media should also mirror, kagaya na sinasabi ni Dr. kanina, malalaman din namin kung tama ba yung direksyon namin. Kasi dapat, pag tumutulong ka, kailangan ba ito? Hindi lang dahil sa palibasa may gamot kami, kung hindi naman nila kailangan. At saka palagi po namin sinasabi sa PHAPCares, in disasters, resources will never be enough. So it's also you have to look at the proper allocation. Saka ayaw po namin ng redundant. Our little help is not actually in lieu of government's resources, but it complements.
Okay.
So yun po yung idea namin doon.
Don't you think it's about time for government to know where people are, who stays where, at sino ang kasama sa bahay, at kung anong edad, so that when disasters come, alam mo na kung sino yung kakain ng ganito, ito ang kailangang gamot, ano po kaya?
Well, dapat alam yun ng barangay captain. Kaya lang dun sa Yolanda scenario nga, pati yung mga barangay captains ay naging biktima.
But my colleagues from PHAPCares would say, paano, sabi nung tao, hindi ako bibigyan ng relief goods dahil hindi ko binoto noong October 28 election. So, can we go beyond politics?
I don't think, I don't think that was an issue at the time that the relief goods were being given. You were given just on the basis of your voting. I think that was an exaggeration naman on the part of whoever was reporting. I think, di ba, pag nagbibigay ka, tatanong mo pa ba, sinong binoto mo?
Hindi, pero identified kasi. Sariwa pa po yung eleksyon noong October 28. It happened November 8.
That's precisely why some of the donors did not want to give the donations through local governments. Dahil dun sa issue na yan. And here is where talagang, I can see the wisdom behind Secretary Ona's desire to put the health system completely under DOH. Kasi maano talaga mahirap for a very technical field like health, napakahirap i-translate yung policies and decisions from the top into actual action on the ground when you have to navigate a very fragmented health system. So, lalo na when you need an immediate response during an emergency or a disaster. So, I think, well, that's another
issue.
Tapatan
Another issue.
session.
Opo,
Pero
opo.
I think that that's part of the answer to the post-Yolanda scenario. We need better coordination, and in the health sector at least, it doesn't help that our health system is fragmented.
Doctors, let me ask you, may nakasakay ako sa eroplano who lost her boyfriend sa Bali bombing some years ago. Ang sabi niya, after 2 days, the Australians were able to put up a field hospital for all the remains for them to do DNA. Okay? Eh dito sa Pilipinas, after so many days, saka pupunta yung NBI to do the DNA. Ano pong nakikita niyong ray of hope from the government that should disasters of that magnitude, God forbid, happen in the Philippines, we could appropriately respond? Dr. Yamamoto.
I think you mentioned an important reality, and that is the government recognized the importance of DNA. So I think what needs to be done is to really calibrate it so that they do it earlier and they do it in a wider magnitude, so that in anticipation that disasters will come. And of course, while we may not know the extent of the disaster, but I think it's a step in the right direction, that among the responses that they have to do is to really ensure that they are capable of doing the DNA identification, and soon and in a wider and broader scale.
Yes, Doctor says? Any reaction?
I was going to say, mahal kasi yung DNA analysis. So I guess that's one of the constraints. Some coordination would also help kasi I remember about a week after, nandun na yung team nila Dr. Fortune from UP Manila. They were asked by DOH. Actually, DOH was the one who asked for the help of Dr. Fortune to help them with the identification of remains and then with the dealing. But they weren't supposed to dispose of the bodies. That wasn't their role. Their role was to help with the identification of the remains. Unfortunately, nagkaroon ng turfing issues yata. Kaya dahil NBI daw dapat ang gumagawa ng ganon. So, sabalutan ngayon yung team ng UP Manila. Kasi,
Yeah, so I heard.
So that's an area where coordination could have helped. I don't know who made the decision na paalisin. I think they should have just worked together because they each have their strengths and the task was so big. They could easily have divided the work and said, oh, ikaw dyan ka sa side na yan, ito kami dito sa side na to, and gotten the work done faster.
Yeah. Okay, mabuti po, nabanggit ninyo. We have questions from the floor. Sol? Meron pa ba? Yes, please. Bakilapit lang po sa mikropono. We have Sol Vance. Okay? Okay. Pahinga muna. May sore throat. Okay. Let me ask our friends for their statements, closing statements. Do we have a light at the end of the tunnel? What can PHAP do to further serve? Tapos yung kay Dr. Posadas, kung isang doktor na pumunta na ron sa lugar para tumulong, apektado pa, what difference would it make should the government send people from the BIR to help? No? How would they feel as well? Diba? BIR, how would they feel? Dahil sabi ng ilang tao, hindi na sa BIR, customs, walang puso. Sabi, pero I don't believe that, no? So, will it make any difference? Okay? Simulan natin sa Red Cross. Anong aasahan sa Red Cross?
In terms of maybe moving forward, we go with the commitment to build further with disaster risk reduction, and we know that we acknowledge that disaster risk reduction is everyone's business. Everyone needs to be taking into account what their level of preparedness is. That's why we continue our commitment for building communities with at least 44 volunteers. That's what we call Red Cross 143. Communities with at least a minimum number of volunteers who are trained to do disaster response, even when the time when organizations or the government wouldn't be able to reach them. Like for example, in areas which becomes isolated after a disaster. The importance of having at least a family kits, emergency lifeline kits, which may be able to support them for 3 days or a week for them to be able to sustain their lifelines. For us, the Red Cross continues to support. The Red Cross is a non-government organization, neither private or government, a humanitarian organization, and we continue our commitment to support the efforts of the government in preparing communities to do disaster preparedness and risk reduction in their own communities, whether it be in health, disaster management, psychosocial support, water sanitation. The thing is, as mentioned earlier, the important thing about considering things beyond with outside your cloak is very important. The concept of integration towards resilience is very important. Taking into account that nutrition has something to do as well with food and security, with livelihood. And taking into account that health is not as well only about medical care, but as well as taking into a look into how we can ensure that preventive measures are done in place, as well as taking into account the importance of psychosocial support mechanisms. Doon kasi pumapasok yung sinasabi po nila earlier na some diseases may not be clinically significant or maybe emanating psychosomatic, yung somatoform na tinatawag nila, psychological in nature, but lumilitaw. But again, could be manifested or could be managed and prevented through psychosocial support activities for children and the older people alike. So also important to have people know the meaning of early warning information. Like, ano ba yung difference talaga ng storm surge? Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng storm surge? Ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng tidal wave? Or, and so on and so forth. Because I think this is also very important aspect of having people prepared. Knowing what they, understanding what they hear, and enacting and responding appropriately to what they hear.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you po.
Very well. Dr. Ces, please.
I'll go back to what I was starting to say kanina about having the information at hand, no? Kasi yung sinabi mo kanina na dapat alam mo kung ilang tao, kung ano. I think you also need to map where your resources are.
Siguro sama na natin yung sexual preference, ano? Sa survey.
In anticipation of where you can get the help that you need. And in line with the information needs would be yung communication. Kasi isa yan sa mga, I think that was one of the most scary things about this disaster. For the first 24 hours, we had very poor communication from the area. I think the fact now we did not hear anything for a number of hours should have alerted us to the severity of the situation. Mm-hmm. That we couldn't get anything even by satellite. Ganun kalala yung sitwasyon. So, ibig sabihin nun, dapat na during those hours na wala tayong naririnig, dapat siguro meron na tayong parang red flag na, oops, mukhang na-overwhelm yung response na kahit sagot sa text o kahit sagot via satellite, wala tayong nakukuha.
Okay.
So, I think that should be, we should know where our resources are so that we can move them very quickly. We should have better lines of communication so that we know what's happening all the time, who needs what, where, how do we get it there. Yung mga ganun, kasi mabilisan nga dapat ang kilos. And then yung sinasabi ni Ryan na calibrated response. So meron kang first 24-hour response, first 72 hours, first week, the first month, and then the first quarter. Nasa first quarter na tayo. Kasi hindi naman nawawala ang disaster sa Pilipinas. And in fact, we have become the world's experts on disasters. So let's show them this time how you respond to a storm like Yolanda.
Yeah. Dr. Joy Yamamoto, would Couples for Christ donate satellite phones to some people in government?
how we wish we can.
Okay.
But we'll just try perhaps to settle what we can probably do. Siguro, I mean, while I agree with all of the things that have been mentioned, I just like to zero in on one item as far as future disaster events would be, and that is really clear-cut evacuation plans. I just take heed of the lesson that we saw, about the way the Japanese responded in the tsunami a few years back. And there were clearly they have clear systems, simplified clear system, in the sense that they were banking that there will be a failure of communication. So they were just doing what they do best, and that is really clearly established where the people will need to evacuate. So I guess the evacuation system must really be refined and redefined.
Okay. Solvancy wrote something here. Marojas and Gasmin went to Tacloban before Yolanda but did not have a satellite phone, kaya wala tayong info from them. Kaya nga sabi ko, sana yung Couples for Christ mag-donate ng satellite phone. Mula sa PHAPCares, Doctor?
Thank you, Melo. PHAPCares po is very honored to be in a very healthy forum like this. I hope we could have more of this. We could guest also our government counterparts so that there is balance in the equation.
We invited them, but they said they have an executive committee meeting. That's why they cannot send not even a janitor this morning. Anyway, it's okay.
Sir Melo, sinabi na ni Dr. at saka ni Ryan, saka ni Dr. Yamamoto, there's one thing that the Philippines is blessed of. We are blessed with disasters, and that is non-modifiable because of our geography. And being prepared is actually a paramount thing, But when do we say we're really prepared? Yun yung problema doon. Kailan natin sasabihin na prepared talaga tayo? So, ang nakita ko po dito is, number one, because of the magnitude of the disaster, hindi po ito yung panahon na hiwa-hiwalay. We should collect our acts together. Kagaya po sa basketball, iba-ibang role, pero may isa lang goal para makascore. So teamwork is the key here. And siguro, yung isa rin dapat na nakita ko when I was still with the military, yung incident, yung concept ng incident command system should be practiced at all times. You should, at the onset of the disaster, dapat may tatlong C's, yung command, control, and coordination. Very, very important siya. And isa pa po, yung PHAPCares is just a small speck in the spectrum of response. But sabi nga po kanina, ito pa lang yung simula. Wala pa tayo, hindi pa natatapos yung Yolanda. Meron na tayong Agaton. So, we would like to also share with you that we are already offering an initial assistance to the Agaton affected areas. So, pati yung mga bagyo, sabi yata nila it's more fun in the Philippines, kaya ayaw umaalis, decided kung umaalis na siya. It's not even a typhoon or a storm, it's just a tropical depression, but the amount of rain that it has poured in, almost the whole of Canada po is paralyzed at this time dahil walang flights, walang pasok, walang bangko. So, every time po is parang dati ang preparation ng PHAPCares is mga siguro 50% lang for disaster, but now siguro between 90 to 95% of our activities are geared towards response. And siguro po isa ring maganda as a concluding statement, I think we can find hope in the fact that Yolanda has united again the country to be one Philippines. We kahit nasa maliliit hanggang nandito ka man o nasa abroad ka, it has stirred our sense of patriotism and nationalism. So siguro sana palaging ganun every time. At saka hindi lang tayo react ng react. Kailangan prepared din tayo. And it starts from the family, it starts from the community where we're at. So we should advocate sana yung, sabi nga ni Ryan kanina, yung DRRM, yung Disaster Risk Reduction and Management. And PHAPCares will always be with you. We'll always be working with our colleagues here in making the Philippines a better place. Thank you.
So Dr. Posadas, with what you said, parang sinasabi nyo lang naman na sana yung National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council would be able to manage really and not turn out to be a disaster by itself. Ganun nga ba yun? Yes. Okay. All right. So Sandali po. Yes, Ted?
I just wanted to also reiterate the commitment of PHAP, the ongoing commitment to Yolanda victims as well as the victims of other disasters. We, as mentioned, we've put up a website, yolanda.phap.org.ph, where you can see our continuing efforts to help. Anti-tetanus and flu vaccines continue to be given and donated to the affected areas. However, as Doc Ed pointed out also, we have moved away from just serving and helping communities to becoming more adept at disasters. So, in fact, PHAP and PHAPCares rather has been recognized to be some sort of expert in disaster response. That Dr. Posadas was even invited to speak at a forum by the United Nations in one instance. No? So, but that's experience that gets honed with all of these things that are happening, no? Whether we like it or not. So the Industry Association continues its commitment to help the government and to enter into partnerships not only with the government but also with private sector groups to work together for a better, healthier Philippines.
Okay. Before we say thank you, Dan, alam ko may announcement.
Well,
Please go ahead.
I have only two questions.
Two questions?
Since then, ilang beses na nagpatawag ng interagency meeting si General Pampilo Lacson. Pangalawa, kung nagtawag siya ng coordinating meetings, sino ang gagawa ng unified report? Ano nangyayari sa Tacloban? Because the people are anxious to know.
Okay. So mukhang walang makakasagot nun. May nakumbida na po ba sa inyo? Kayo po ba, PHAP, nakumbida na sa grupo?
Wala pa bang coordinating
Actually,
meetings?
actually during the Christmas break, there were feelers sent about working with the office of Secretary Lacson, no? But they also said because at the moment I think they're getting everything in order administratively as well as all I know is also what I read in the newspapers, no, about what's going on. So we're still waiting for this movement or this group
You're
to.
still waiting for him to call?
We're waiting for them to say that we can actually meet. Kasi wala
On
pa
the
po.
ground? My God.
Oo.
Anyway,
So, with your
the
announcement.
second question.
Akala ko yun.
Sinong gagawa ng unified report kung ano nangyayari on the ground?
Palagay ko, dapat si Madam Auring yung sasagot niyan eh.
Anyway.
Your announcement, please.
Yeah, my announcement is, last Friday we had the forum at the Kamayan, one of the oldest, yung in-establish nila Big Milan at saka
May he rest in peace.
yeah, Big Billiard Bizancio. Incidentally,
Ang buhay pa si Big Big.
tomorrow is the 2-year death anniversary of Big Milan. We are very
2
sad
years
about
na
that.
pala.
Yes,
Okay.
2 years ago.
Okay.
January 21st. Anyway, out of that forum, we went down to the basic cause of all these disasters. Plant a tree, the forest. On February 2, which is the World Wetlands Day, as agreed the Iran Ramsar Convention, we will celebrate the beauty and the productivity of the mangroves. It's a different kind of a forest.
Okay.
In fact, Thailand and all those visited by tsunami agreed that mangroves is a very important item to prevent disasters.
Okay.
Okay, so February 2, Sunday, at the Arroceros Forest Park, we will have a mass and a media forum, and anybody who's interested to learn about the forest,
Okay.
then please come.
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock misa and then media forum doon sa Arroceros Forest Park. So we will see actually nearby the value of a forest.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maraming salamat, Dan. Mga kaibigan, alam po ninyo, napakagandang pag-usapan. Sabi nga, hindsight offers us a perfect vision. And we should not stop looking back at what happened for us to plan something better. But definitely, statistics would be required. It is for this reason that we call on government to lead. We need a good conductor, sabi nga, to lead the country, kay NGO, kay private group, kay business group, kay faith-based groups, no? To work together, because after all, we serve the same people. This is not an appeal, this is a request, because we expect government to lead the way. We cannot do it by ourselves. People in media cannot do it. No? Kaya nga, whenever I see people saying, salamat sa GMA, may relief goods na kami. Nagtatanong ako, where's government? And there is government. The question is, kahit na mag-impake ka ng 50,000 pakete in a day, paano makakarating yan sa Tacloban? Paano makakarating yan sa Ormoc at sa Giwan? Ito po ang hamon. Especially ngayon, the National Day of Prayer. Considering all these events, we need to pray a lot more. But definitely, once we pray, we invite everyone of every political color to join us, because almost all of these people serve the same constituents. Kaya ikaw anong partido, pagtulungan natin dahil iisang bansa, iisang grupo tayo ay Pilipino. I'd like to thank our guests who took time out to be with us, si Dr. Yamamoto, for encountering the traffic from where he lives. You know, sabi ng MMDA, that's a sign of progress. Kay Dr. Ces, ganun din kay Ryan, at kay Dr. Posadas, at kay Ted mula sa PHAP. Ito po si Melo Acuna, mga kasama sa Areopagus, sa Tapatan, sa Aristocrat. I'd like to thank you for being with us. Have a nice day. But next week, we will go deeper into anong dahilan ng mga aksidente. Bakit maraming namamatay? Hindi ba yung eroplano lang ang lumilipad? Bakit may bus na lumilipad? Yan po ang paksa sa susunod na Lunes. Salamat po.